This is called Afterlife is the Afterlife. Just, play on words and stuff like that. I'd like to continue with the discussion of some of the major forms of afterlife as viewed in Tibet and India, particularly the terms reincarnation and rebirth. And what I'm sharing here is not my personal experience of being reborn and so forth, but rather the results of a somewhat careful study of trying to clearly understand just what happens at death and who or what transmigrates to another birth and how does that work. So you're welcome to join me, but it could be somewhat of a bumpy ride, but anyway, here goes. Now, reincarnation, that word, is the Hindu belief, the Indian belief that the soul is eternal, permanent, and that the same unchanging us, our same unchanging soul, reincarnates from body to body, life after life. Now, of course, the Christians also believe in the idea of an eternal soul, but they don't believe in reincarnation. Rather, they believe that physically we only go around once, as they say, and after which it's heaven, hell, limbo, or purgatory. Now, on the other hand, the Tibetan Buddhists believe, in particular a group called the Yogacarans, they believe that instead of an eternal soul, we have a persistent soul-like entity that takes rebirth, but one that itself is impermanent and it's not eternal and unchanging. In other words, we change. So instead of the single soul, the eternal soul of the Hindus, the Tibetan Yogacharan view is that it's one of an impermanent entity, loosely made up of the four or five aggregates, what are called the skandhas, and we'll try to get to some of this, and many arising karmic traces from our own actions. And the threads of all these are sort of braided together like a rope, creating a continuum that might look like it's eternal or endless. But in reality, it's but a series of threads, each thread of a limited duration, kind of plaited together so that it could be easily mistaken, and it is, for a continuity. Most of us make that simple mistake. With Tibetan Buddhism, the idea is that all that currently makes up our current personality, what we call our self, our likes and dislikes and biases and prejudice, whatever we have fixated on during our life, all of this is left at death's door. And after we die, we enter the bardo without what physically makes up our self, the result of our particular attachments, our particular fixations. They're left at death's door, so to speak, but not our habit of fixating. This alone, this fixation, this habit of grasping and of fixating, this alone is something of a liberation. I mean, if everything that makes up our self, our fixation is left behind, what is it that then moves from life to life? And that's what I'm trying to get to. In the Tibetan view, as mentioned, what actually transmigrates is not a permanent soul, but rather a collection of karmic traces and imprints, desires, and the urge to fixate. These are stored in what is called the storehouse consciousness. It's kind of like what we call here in the West our subconscious. But In Tibet and India, it's called, in Sanskrit, alaya vijnana. So you might as well learn to pronounce the Sanskrit word alaya vijnana, since its sound is meaningful in itself, and it's worth the effort to learn it. So alaya vijnana. Anyway, the alaya vijnana, the storehouse consciousness, which is said to persist through all of our births and all of our future lives, it's the result of our own karma and all of the residual traces that go with it. I mean, literally, it's the result of our actions, great and small, from killing, lying, stealing, etc. That's on the high end, to every little wince, every reaction we have on the lower end, all day long. So all of this is dutifully recorded as karma, and it goes into, or is placed into, the alaya vijnana, the storehouse consciousness. It's kind of where it's kind of like a karmic database. Now, as I understand it, all of these karmic traces, as mentioned, are stored, and they remain in the storehouse consciousness for the length of time dictated by their individual intent, and to the degree that they deviate from the truth, from reality, the true or actual nature of the mind. So, in other words, what we call karma. And all of these traces and stuff don't get recorded all at once, nor do they re-arise all at once. So we have a relatively infinite amount of these karmic traces, all bound together like packets and threaded, each of which has their own expiration date, after which they're subject to being triggered, and at that time they arise and affect our life here or somewhere down the line of our rebirths. That's what's called karma. Every action has a reaction. As they say, karma burns twice. Once when it goes down, when we record it, and thus it becomes a further obscuration of our inner self or our vision, and it burns the second time when the karma eventually ripens and re-arises as a delayed response to its original cause. When its term limit, as a latency, when that expires, so to speak. So the alaya vijnana is like a seething mass of activity, like several grand central stations all interacting at once, with the rush of karma, great and small, coming and going all the time. Karma going down, the results of karma rising. So it's kind of the veritable control tower of what drives us. And this whole interactive mass of karmic traces, this whole threaded mass, slowly moves into the future, following us through our rebirths like some great river barge as we go from life to life. The teachings say that the alaya vijnana will continue to follow us, and it will last until we finally reach enlightenment, at which time all of the karmic traces will be exhausted and the alaya vijnana will be cleared and emptied. It'll be empty. Now, what is most interesting to me is that the Tibetan Buddhists say that, as I mentioned earlier, we don't have a permanent self or soul, as the Hindus and the Christians believe. But we do have something that amounts to an impermanent self. It's a self, but it's just one that's not eternal. In other words, something does persist of us from rebirth to rebirth. And now, this is the key point. If that weren't true, otherwise there would be no point in Dharma training whatsoever, because there would not be anyone who could benefit from meditation and mind training, i.e., no one to train. So think about that. And this idea suggests that while our entity, whatever that we want to call it, is not permanent, it's not an eternal soul that's unchanging, we do have something that is bunched together enough that it animates us from life to life. And that mass of karmic desires or karmic impulses that's stored in the alaya vijnana reanimates in the next rebirth as a person that can benefit from learning and growing in awareness. So perhaps we don't have an eternal soul, but we have something similar to a soul in that we can learn and profit from training. And that fact is so important. In any case, it's what we have. Now I should add that the Tibetan caveat as to our not having a permanent, eternal, or non-changing self is that it's obvious that if we had a soul that was non-changing, that was unchanging and permanently so, then it by definition couldn't be changed. It couldn't be improved. It could not be taught. So this is the way the Tibetans look at it. In other words, you can't salt the salt, so to speak. This fact, the Tibetans point out, is better than having an eternal soul. And the Yogacharans explain that if we lack an eternal soul, it's not something to be ashamed of, not a defect, but rather just the opposite, a feature, a plus. Because by allowing change, by being able to change, we can adapt and become enlightened. Otherwise, we couldn't. We would just be whatever we were forever. Now, this is a sidebar thought. A spin-off from the Hindu concept of an eternal soul, a permanent soul, there's another Indian concept that's called the watcher. It's an unchanging eternal presence that watches our soul, the one we don't have, on its journey through the flesh. Now, I haven't read much about this. I have no idea to whom the watcher reports what it sees or watches, because I can't figure that out. But I include it here just because it's another twist of these same ideas. And as I mentioned, I haven't really studied it, nor do I know where I could study it. Now, what I get from all of this is that while we may not have what amounts to an eternal soul, what we do have, and pardon me for being obvious, is what we have right now and what we already know so well, which is this life that we're currently living. I mean, here we are. Whatever we have, put it another way, whether what we have is an unchanging eternal soul or a slowly changing impermanent soul, like something like that, the fact remains that what we see and experience right here and now is not some shabby second-rate experience. It is what it is, and precisely that. Anyway, to continue with the Tibetan Buddhist description, at least that of the Yogacharan view, this barge-like collection of all our karmic traces and desires that moves upstream with us to rebirth, that follows us through time, this storehouse consciousness, whose contents, when triggered, all of these karmic traces, arise to reanimate us at rebirth. So these latent desires and karmic obligations, they are the fuel that drives our succession of rebirths until they eventually are exhausted at enlightenment. So karma ripens, and as it ripens, it triggers whatever soul-like entity that we are that can be affected by it. I mean, as mentioned earlier, it's like a control tower, or it's like a timed release. Remember those time release pills? That all of these things, all these karmic traces, things that we've done, are all threaded together like a rope, and they are released gradually over time. Now, at rebirth, we don't continue with the same personality or self that we left behind from this life. And this is an important one to understand, because our life now will be a product of another time and place, like another birth and death life situation. So, and what we call ourself right now is made up of a particular environment of parents, of genes, circumstances, and it's based on our fixations, our particular likes and dislikes right now, in this life. In other words, our personality is personal to a given birth, but perhaps the, quote, self, previous self or a reborn self, is animated to a marked degree by the collective karmic traces that are still ripening within us, that are arising from the alaya vijnana, so that when one physical vehicle dies, body, and is abandoned, our unfulfilled desires apparently immediately begin to look for another rebirth. And the Yogacharan view is that this transmigrating impermanent consciousness that we are, that's driven by desire, is hungry for experience. I mean, we ask for more life. And its lack of training and compulsion for existence allows it to latch onto, in the bardo, just about any sort of womb that it encounters. It could be a human form, but apparently, according to the teachings, we could also take rebirth as a fly or a microbe, if we are desperate enough to take refuge in a form, if we're seeking another birth. The consciousness or entity that we are may be vast, a great consciousness, but the means of expression of that entity via rebirth can be limited to the physical opportunities offered by any particular bodily form. So if the human body, then our consciousness animates the human form. And if, like a housefly, the physical limitations and expression of a fly, that's animated. This idea is key and should be carefully considered, in my opinion, because it explains a lot, and it's why the Tibetans consider all life, all sentient beings, as precious, because the fly has the same potential as we do, the same consciousness, but it's just limited by the physics of being a fly. Anyway, such lower rebirths are the result of our compulsive desire to take on form and to live.